They didn't thank her. They didn't ask what she carried. They just removed her name from the org chart like deleting a line would erase the weight behind it. And maybe that was the point. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or quietly replaced, this story is for you. Subscribe if it hits home. And if you've ever watched karma unfold without fireworks, leave a comment. Sometimes consequences don't scream. Sometimes they arrive in silence. They called it optimization. No one could explain what exactly was being optimized, but the words showed up everywhere in the decks. The same way alignment showed up when leadership couldn't admit they were guessing. The calendar invite arrived at 8:52 a.m. on a Wednesday. No subject line, no agenda, no context, just 2 words in the body, Conference 4C required. The sender wasn't my manager. It wasn't even anyone I'd met. A general operations alias. The kind that exists so no one has to own what's about to happen. I stared at the invite longer than I should have. Not because I was afraid, because it was familiar. I'd seen that exact quiet before. The quiet that comes right before someone tries to make a decision feel like a formality. I accepted without responding. At 9 o'clock on the dot, I walked into 4C. Marcus Hale was already there. New CEO, new smile, new certainty. The kind men wear when they've been promoted above their understanding. Beside him sat Irene Walsh from HR, posture rigid, hands folded too neatly, eyes fixed on the table like she'd rather be staring at a wall. There was a third chair, empty, which somehow made the room feel crowded. I took my seat without being asked. I didn't bring a notebook. I didn't bring a water bottle. I'd learned long ago that when a meeting arrives with no subject line, you don't need notes. You need composure. Marcus didn't waste time. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, voice soft in that manufactured way executives use when they want you to feel like you're being treated gently. "Evelyn," he began, "we're restructuring the organization to better position the company for what's ahead." He said it like he was reading it from a screen, like he'd practiced the cadence, like he believed the right tone could turn a blade into a ribbon. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I let the sentence hang. He continued. "And unfortunately, your role has been impacted." There it was, the corporate version of a firing squad. Clean words, bloodless language. The kind designed to make the person delivering it feel less responsible for what it does. I glanced at Irene. Her eyes dropped lower. She looked like someone watching a slow accident they can't stop. Marcus reached for a folder. White, unmarked, thick enough to feel decisive. "This isn't performance-related," he added quickly, like that should make it easier. "It's about operational focus. We're consolidating cross-border functions into a more scalable model." Scalable. I'd heard that word 1,000 times. Always spoken by people who thought scale was a spreadsheet and not a series of relationships that can break if you breathe wrong. I kept my hands folded in my lap. "Okay," I said. That surprised him. I saw it in the micro-shift of his eyebrows. Executives expect resistance. They expect pleading. They expect emotion they can label as unprofessional so they can dismiss it. They don't expect calm. Calm makes them nervous because calm implies you see something they don't. He cleared his throat. "We appreciate what you've contributed over the years. This decision isn't personal." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. It was personal to the countries I'd kept from walking away. Personal to the contracts I'd salvaged at 2 a.m. because someone in legal misused a term that translated into insult. Personal to the vendors who trusted my silence more than our marketing. Personal to the partners who didn't care about our branding, only whether the person on the other end understood what couldn't be said out loud. But no, Marcus, it wasn't personal to you, because you didn't know enough to make it personal. "Who's taking over my accounts?" I asked. That was the first time his confidence stalled. He glanced at Irene. She didn't move. "We're still finalizing the transition plan," he said, "but we have a strong team. We'll make sure there's continuity." Continuity. Another word people use when they don't understand what continuity requires. I leaned back slightly. "Do you know what continuity is in this context?" His expression tightened, not angry, just confused, like he hadn't expected the conversation to turn into something with edges. Continuity is making sure, he started. Continuity, I said softly, is knowing which terms can't be moved from one paragraph to another without changing the meaning. It's knowing that a delayed response isn't disinterest, it's deliberation. It's knowing when a government liaison says, "We will consider it," they are not considering it. They are warning you. It's knowing what to say when a partner goes silent and what not to say when they return. Marcus blinked. Once. Twice. I could almost see the thought forming. This is more complicated than I expected. But he was too committed to his decision to admit it now. Leadership rarely changes course in front of someone they've already decided is expendable. He lifted the folder and slid it toward me. Your severance package is outlined here, he said, and we'd like to ensure you have support during the transition. Support? I opened the folder. It was exactly what I expected. Legal language, exit instructions, a polite paragraph of gratitude that felt like it had been pasted from a template. One line stood out. Please return all company materials. I looked up. Do you want the notebooks? Marcus frowned. What notebooks? I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence do what it does best, make people aware of what they don't know. The binders, I said finally. The ones I kept because half the legal nuance doesn't live in your databases. The ones with the notes from my meetings in Casablanca, Abu Dhabi, Tunis. The ones that explain why we phrase a non-compete clause one way in one jurisdiction and a completely different way in another, so it doesn't trigger a cultural or regulatory backlash. Irene's lips pressed together. I saw the faintest reaction. She knew. She'd seen those binders once. She'd even joked about how I was the only person in the company who still used paper. Marcus glanced at her. We have everything digitized, he said, trying to sound certain. I nodded slowly. Do you? He didn't answer, because he didn't know, and the truth is he didn't have time to know. He was here to deliver a decision that had already been signed off in a meeting I wasn't invited to. A meeting where my work was described as a cost. A line item. Legacy fat. The irony is, I'd spent my entire career making sure the company never bled publicly. I absorbed crises so quietly they never made it to leadership. I fixed misunderstandings before they became scandals. I built trust in places where trust is not given to logos, but to people. And they fired the person who was holding the bridge together because the bridge didn't show up on their financial report. I closed the folder. When is my last day? I asked. Today, Irene said, voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause after that. The kind that feels like someone dropped something fragile in the middle of the room. Today, no handover, no transition, no plan. Just removal. I stood, smoothed the hem of my blazer. Not because I wanted to look composed, because routine is armor, and I wasn't giving them the satisfaction of seeing me crack. Marcus rose halfway from his chair like he wasn't sure if he should. Evelyn, he said, I truly wish you the best. I looked at him, directly, long enough that he couldn't hide behind the softness of his voice. I know, I said. You think you mean that? His jaw tightened. He didn't understand the difference between wishing someone well and understanding what you've just done to them. I turned to Irene. She wouldn't meet my eyes, and then I left. Not storming, not dramatic, just a clean, quiet exit, because I knew something they didn't. They thought they'd cut a cost. They'd cut an artery. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. I watched the numbers light up one by one like a countdown. I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel grief. I felt clarity. That's the thing people don't tell you about being dismissed. Sometimes the absence of a job doesn't create emptiness. Sometimes it creates space. And space is dangerous for companies that confuse control with stability. I walked through the lobby without looking back. The receptionist smiled, unaware. Security nodded. My badge still worked because no one had even coordinated the timing properly. Efficiency, right? Outside, the air was cold enough to feel real. I took a breath and tasted something I hadn't tasted in months. Silence that belonged to me. I didn't go home immediately. I drove. No destination, just motion. My hands stayed steady on the wheel. My thoughts stayed oddly quiet. I wasn't replaying the meeting. I wasn't fantasizing about revenge. Revenge is loud, messy, emotional. What I felt was older than revenge. What I felt was inevitability, because I knew exactly what they didn't understand. They didn't understand that my job wasn't translation. It wasn't coordination. It wasn't regional support. My job was containment. I contained risk. I contained offense. I contained misinterpretation. I contained the fragile, invisible chain of respect that keeps international partnerships alive when everyone involved is too proud to admit confusion. And they'd decided they didn't need that anymore. Because Marcus Hale looked at a spreadsheet and saw 3 accounts under my name. He didn't see the messages that never escalated because I handled them before dawn. He didn't see the clauses I rewrote in a way that preserved dignity on both sides. He didn't see the times I told a partner no in a way that made them feel heard instead of humiliated. He didn't see the 10 years of quiet credibility I'd built in rooms where people don't forgive embarrassment. And most of all, he didn't see the simple truth. In the markets he was trying to scale, your logo gets you the first meeting. Your person gets you the second. I was the person. The first 24 hours after I was terminated, I did nothing that looked like job hunting. I didn't touch the folder, didn't open the severance breakdown, didn't read the non-disparagement clause I already knew would be in there. I cleaned. I vacuumed the corners of my apartment like I was trying to pull the chaos out of the walls. I washed sheets. I organized drawers. I wiped down the kitchen counters until the smell of corporate air left my hands. There's something stabilizing about cleaning when your life has just been rearranged without your consent. It's proof you can still decide what goes where. On Friday evening, I opened the closet in my home office and pulled out the binders. Yes, actual binders. Thick ones. Labeled by country, by regulatory body, by sector. Pages annotated in my handwriting because the most important context never fits inside a formal memo. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, and flipped through notes I hadn't touched in years. Some were from deals that never happened, partnerships that died quietly, relationships that drifted, but they all had one thing in common. They were mine, built by me, not because anyone asked me to, because I understood something early in my career. Someday someone would act like this work appeared out of nowhere, and I would need proof that it didn't. That day had arrived. My phone buzzed. Not a company email, not an HR follow-up. A message from an unknown number. No greeting. No name, just a line. Is it true you're no longer with them? I stared at it. I knew who it was before I answered. Not by the number, by the tone. Polite, controlled, direct. People in certain circles don't waste words. I didn't reply immediately. I set the phone down on the rug and looked back at the binders, because I wasn't going to respond from anger. I was going to respond from position. Another buzz, this time an email. Subject line, checking in. Sender, Noah Pierce. I hadn't spoken to Noah in almost a year. We'd met at a regulatory symposium in Geneva, one of those events where executives shake hands and pretend they understand cross-border compliance, while the real experts sit in the back exchanging quiet warnings. Noah was different, not because he was nicer, because he was curious. He'd asked questions executives don't ask. What breaks deals? What offends people? What isn't written down? And he'd listened like the answers mattered. His email was short. Heard what happened. I'm building something that won't make that mistake. Do you have time Monday? I read it twice. Not because it was unclear, because it was rare. Most people only reach out when they want something. This was different. This was someone offering me a seat before I had to prove I deserved it. I didn't hesitate. I replied with 2 words, Monday works, and then only then I picked up my phone and responded to the unknown number. 1 sentence. Yes, and I'm not taking calls yet. A pause, then 3 dots, then, understood, please advise who we should coordinate with moving forward. I felt something shift in my chest, not satisfaction, not victory, recognition. Because that question, who should we coordinate with, was the question my company should have asked before they fired me. It was the question that proved what I already knew. The market didn't see me as replaceable. The company did, and that mismatch was about to cost them. I didn't hear about the fallout through official channels. I heard it the way real news travels inside corporations, through whispers, screenshots, and people with guilty consciences. On Monday morning, around 9:37 a.m., my former colleague from legal, Nina, texted me 4 words. "They're in the building." I stared at the message, then typed back. "Who?" She responded immediately. "Ramen Group delegation. Big." My stomach tightened slightly. Not fear, not regret, just the awareness of timing. Because I knew what that meant. I knew who Adil Rahman was. Not personally, not the way Marcus Hale assumed relationships worked, but I knew his patterns. Adil Rahman didn't fly in for casual conversation, and he didn't arrive without expecting a specific kind of continuity. I didn't respond to Nina. I didn't ask questions. I didn't ask for details. I turned my laptop toward me and opened Noah's calendar invite for 11 o'clock a.m. Because while Ridgeline Systems, my former company, was preparing to impress a delegation with catered tea and polite slides, I was preparing to build something that wouldn't depend on executives understanding my value. It would be built with the assumption that value exists even when it's quiet. And somewhere across the city, in a glass conference room, Marcus Hale was about to learn the difference between a role and a relationship, the difference between optimization and amputation, and he was going to learn it the hard way, quietly, in front of people who don't raise their voices when they lose respect. They just stand up and leave. They didn't tell me how it went. They didn't have to. The silence arrived first. Monday morning unfolded exactly the way it always did inside that building. Coffee machines humming, assistants rehearsing smiles, executives pacing conference rooms pretending they weren't nervous. The only difference was the absence no one wanted to name. Mine. Inside conference room 7A, the table had been rearranged twice. The original seating chart scrapped, then revised, then abandoned entirely. Small flags were placed at each seat, then removed. The projection screen cycled through 3 different logo animations before someone finally froze it on the least offensive option. They were overcorrecting. That's how you know something's wrong. When Adil Rahman entered the room, he didn't comment on any of it. He never did. He arrived precisely on time, flanked by 2 advisors and 1 interpreter who didn't take a seat. Interpreters who sit are either inexperienced or unnecessary. His didn't sit. Marcus Hale stood near the head of the table, posture carefully neutral, hands clasped in front of him like he'd practiced humility in the mirror. Introductions were exchanged, pleasantries offered, tea poured, and then before anyone could launch into the slide deck, Adil spoke. 1 sentence, measured, calm. "Who is handling continuity on this engagement?" It wasn't an accusation. It was a test. The kind designed to reveal what people assume doesn't matter. Marcus smiled, relieved to finally be asked something he thought he could answer. "We've assembled a cross-functional team," he said. "Legal, operations, regional strategy, all fully briefed." Adil nodded slowly. "Briefed by whom?" The room shifted. Marcus glanced down the table. Someone from strategy leaned forward, eager to help. "We've reviewed all prior documentation," the strategist said quickly. "Contracts, correspondence, compliance notes." Adil raised 1 hand, not abruptly, not aggressively, just enough to stop the sentence from finishing. "Documentation," he repeated. "Yes, exactly, documentation." He let the word sit between them. Then he asked the question that mattered. "And who carries the judgment?" No one answered, because judgment isn't a deliverable. You can't forward it in an email. You can't summarize it in a slide. You can't assign it to a junior analyst with a checklist. Judgment lives in people. And they had just admitted, without meaning to, that the person who carried it wasn't there. The interpreter didn't translate the pause. There was nothing to translate. Silence doesn't need language. Marcus cleared his throat. "Evelyn Hart is no longer with the company," he said, trying to sound decisive. "But rest assured, we've ensured a seamless transition." Adel looked at him then, really looked. Not with anger, not with disappointment, with curiosity. You removed her, he said. It wasn't framed as a question. Marcus hesitated. We restructured her role. Adel nodded once, then turned slightly toward his advisors and said something quietly in Arabic. I didn't hear it. I didn't need to. I'd heard that tone before. It's the tone people use when they've confirmed something unfortunate but unsurprising. The advisors stood. So did Adel. No raised voices, no confrontation, no dramatic statements about trust or disappointment, just a simple act of alignment, standing up. Marcus blinked. Perhaps we can continue this conversation, Adel interrupted him gently. We do not proceed without continuity, he said, and continuity is not transferable. That was it. They left the room the way they'd entered it. Composed, deliberate, final. The meeting ended before it began, and somewhere between the untouched tea and the carefully prepared slides, a multi-year partnership collapsed without a single argument. I learned about it 20 minutes later. Not from Marcus, not from leadership, from a message sent without punctuation. They walked. Nina again. I stared at the words. Then my phone rang. I didn't answer. Another buzz, voicemail. I didn't listen. Because I already knew what it would say. It would say something about urgency, about miscommunication, about needing context. It would not say the one word that mattered, mistake. Instead, I closed my laptop and prepared for my call with Noah Pierce. 11 o'clock m sharp. Noah didn't open with sympathy. That's one of the reasons I trusted him. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't frame my departure as a loss he needed to console. He opened with clarity. I don't want to rebuild what you just left, he said. I want to build what they never understood. I waited, curiosity before commitment. Which is, I asked. He leaned forward. Infrastructure that assumes cultural intelligence is not an accessory. It's the system. That got my attention. Noah's company, Arcspire, was still young, underfunded, unfinished. But it had something Ridgeline had lost somewhere along the way. Respect for what it didn't know. He shared his screen, not slides, live documents, messy drafts, open questions. We're expanding into North Africa and the Gulf, he said. Everyone keeps telling me to hire translators. I don't need translators. I need someone who understands where translation fails. I smiled slightly. Translation always fails, I said. That's why people like me exist, he nodded. Exactly. We didn't talk titles. We didn't talk hierarchy. We talked boundaries, autonomy, scope, what I would and would not touch, what decisions required consultation, what decisions were mine alone. By the end of the call, something was clear. This wasn't a job, it was a platform, and I would design it. Back at Ridgeline, the day unraveled quietly. There was no all-hands meeting, no announcement, no explanation sent company-wide, just a closed-door session scheduled at 1:00 p.m. labeled Alignment Discussion. It ran until nearly 5. No conclusions reached. No plan formed, because you can't align your way out of a missing pillar. At 3:12 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, an email. Sender, operations@ridgeline.com subject. Quick check-in, no greeting. Just a sentence. Can we schedule a call to discuss some recent developments? Recent developments. I didn't respond. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. Because once you've been removed quietly, you learn something important. Silence is also a language, and they were finally hearing mine. The second message arrived the next morning, more formal, more polished, from Marcus's executive assistant. Marcus would value the opportunity to reconnect regarding potential strategic consulting options. Consulting. That was fast. The same insight they'd cut without discussion. The same judgment they dismissed as legacy. Now rebranded as strategy. I didn't reply. I wasn't angry. Anger still centers the people who wronged you. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about choosing not to re-enter a room where my value had to be rediscovered through loss. By Wednesday, the ripple reached outside the company. A former partner emailed, then another. Short messages, carefully worded, all circling the same question without asking it directly. Are you available? Are you still the point of contact? Has anything changed? I answered none of them immediately, because availability without structure is vulnerability. Instead, I called a lawyer, not to sue, to frame. By Thursday afternoon, my boundaries were written down, not emotional boundaries, operational ones. I would not return as an employee. I would not report to Marcus. I would not attend internal meetings. I would not train a replacement. What I offered was containment. Surgical, limited, autonomous. I drafted the terms myself. Scope, duration, rate, termination clauses. The first clause was the most important. This agreement does not imply continuity of employment. The second clause followed. All advisory work will be performed independently, at the consultant's discretion, without obligation to internal alignment processes. I sent the document through my attorney. No note, no explanation, just the contract. They signed it within 48 hours, not because they liked it, because they had no leverage. By then, 3 partners had gone silent. One had frozen renewal discussions entirely. Another had quietly opened talks with Arcspire. My new firm. Noah didn't mention it. He didn't need to. The market has a way of moving towards stability, and stability follows people, not logos. The first time Adil Rahman's office reached out again, it wasn't to Ridgeline. It was to me, directly. The message was short, respectful, clear. We understand you are leading continuity elsewhere. Please confirm availability. I confirmed, and just like that, the axis shifted, not loudly, not publicly, but permanently. Ridgeline tried to pitch another regional contract 2 weeks later. They sent a proposal with no name attached. No liaison, no accountability, just deliverables and branding. The response came back in under a day. 2 sentences. We appreciate the submission. However, we do not proceed without cultural assurance. They didn't say my name. They didn't have to. Everyone knew what it meant. The truth is, I was never just a role. I was never a box on an org chart. I was the pause between messages. The voice remembered when things went wrong. The person who knew when to speak and when silence carried more weight. Ridgeline never understood that. They thought trust could be reassigned. They thought replacing me meant hiring someone louder, younger, cheaper. But trust isn't transferable. It's earned. It's felt. And once it's broken, no amount of restructuring puts it back together the same way. By Friday, Marcus called me himself. I let it go to voicemail. His voice sounded thinner than I remembered. Evelyn, he said, I hope you're well. We may have acted prematurely. There's strong interest in reestablishing a collaborative relationship. Please reach out. Prematurely. Not wrong, not careless. Premature, like my removal had been a scheduling error. I didn't call back, because the collaboration was already happening, just not with him at the center. I updated my online presence that afternoon, not with a new title, not with an announcement. I made it private. No photo, no contact details, just a blank banner. Sometimes the most powerful signal is absence, because panic echoes louder when there's nowhere to send it. Arcspire moved fast, without the noise, without the committees. I led 2 expansion initiatives independently. My name appeared on partner documents without a prefix. No VP, no director, just responsibility. When Adil's team joined our next call, there was no confusion about who spoke for whom. No one asked where I worked before. They already knew, because reputation travels faster than resumes in the rooms that matter. Ridgeline still speaks my name in meetings, carefully, because now they understand something they didn't before. Some people don't need visibility to hold power. They need distance. And once you learn that, you stop fighting to be heard. You let the absence do the work. They thought the agreement meant resolution. It didn't. It meant containment. And containment is not reconciliation. It's damage control, precise, limited, and indifferent to feelings. The consulting contract went into effect on a Monday. No announcement. No internal memo. No explanation to staff. Just a quiet update in a shared drive that most people didn't have access to. I worked from where I chose. Sometimes my apartment. Sometimes a quiet hotel lobby. Once from an airport lounge while watching flights depart to cities I used to negotiate in person. I answered only one inbox. I spoke only to external stakeholders. I did not attend meetings designed to make executives feel included. And most importantly, I did not soften my language. Because the luxury of politeness belongs to those who aren't cleaning up someone else's mistake. The first advisory memo I sent to Ridgeline was 3 pages long. No branding, no preamble, just analysis. What had broken, why it broke, what could be stabilized, what was already lost. I ended it with a sentence that made their legal team nervous. Continuity can be temporarily simulated, but not restored. They asked for clarification. I declined. Clarity was not the problem. Acceptance was. By midweek, the emails increased. Not desperate yet, just cautious. Probing. Can you review this draft? Can you advise on tone? Would you recommend we proceed? I responded selectively. Not to be difficult, but to reinforce a truth they needed to learn quickly. Access to me was no longer automatic. It was earned per interaction. Each response took hours, sometimes a full day. Not because I was busy, but because speed creates dependency, and dependency is what they'd abused before. When you're too available, people stop noticing the cost of losing you. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. Arcspire, meanwhile, moved differently. They didn't ask for availability. They assumed collaboration. They didn't frame questions as requests for permission. They framed them as shared problems. Noah trusted silence, trusted pauses, trusted that if I hadn't responded yet, there was a reason. And that reason was usually judgment forming. We rebuilt workflows from the ground up, not to localize them, but to respect the logic they'd been designed to ignore. We adjusted escalation paths, rewrote compliance triggers, removed assumptions that only worked in boardrooms, not in ministries. And something interesting happened. Partners noticed. They noticed fewer misunderstandings, fewer delays, fewer polite refusals disguised as "we'll get back to you." The work didn't look flashy, but it worked. The second time Ridgeline tried to push boundaries, I shut it down. It came as a meeting invite. Subject, strategic sync attendees. 12, agenda, blank. I declined, no explanation. Marcus followed up personally. "We were hoping to get your perspective in real time," he wrote. I replied with one sentence. "Real-time access is not part of the agreement." That was the moment he understood. Not fully, but enough. He was no longer in charge of the relationship. He was a client, and clients don't dictate terms. The turning point came 3 weeks later, not through a crisis, but through an omission. Ridgeline submitted a proposal to a North African regulatory body. On paper, it was flawless, legally compliant, technically sound, beautifully designed. It was rejected within 48 hours. No explanation. Just a polite notice stating the submission would not proceed. Marcus forwarded it to me with a single line. "Any insight?" I reviewed the document once. Then again, then I closed it. The problem wasn't what they'd included. It was what they'd removed. A single paragraph, buried in the appendix, rewritten to sound more streamlined. A paragraph I'd originally drafted years ago, not for legal reasons, but cultural ones. It acknowledged shared responsibility, mutual obligation, respect. Without it, the proposal read as efficient, but efficiency in that context felt like dominance, and dominance closes doors. I wrote back. "You removed the assurance clause." A pause. Then, legal advised it wasn't necessary. I responded. "Legal is not the audience." There was no reply after that, because what could they say? That they'd optimized the very thing that made the relationship possible. Arcspire didn't make that mistake, because Arcspire didn't reduce trust to language that could be edited for tone. They treated it as infrastructure, and infrastructure, once removed, collapses everything built on top of it. By the end of the month, the contrast was undeniable. Ridgeline was still operating, but cautiously, reactively, nervously. Arcspire was expanding, not aggressively, strategically. Partners didn't need convincing. They needed reassurance, and reassurance comes from familiarity, not branding. When they asked who was handling continuity, there was no pause. There was no confusion. There was just my name. Ridgeline tried once more, this time with humility rehearsed. Marcus requested a call. No agenda, no assistance, just him. I agreed on one condition. It would be 15 minutes, no negotiation. On the call, he didn't start with apology. He started with explanation, which told me everything. "We underestimated the role," he said. "We didn't understand the full scope." I let the silence stretch. He continued. "We're trying to correct that." I spoke then, calmly. "You're not," I said. "You're trying to manage the consequence." He inhaled sharply. "What would it take to fix this?" he asked. There it was, the final misunderstanding. I answered honestly. "Nothing," I said. "This isn't broken, it's finished." Another pause. He didn't like that. "We value your expertise," he said. I smiled. He couldn't see it, but he could hear it. "You value it now," I replied, "because you can measure the absence." That was the truth he couldn't escape. Value discovered through loss isn't value, it's regret. And regret doesn't rebuild trust. It just explains why it disappeared. We ended the call without resolution, without drama, without closure. And that was exactly how it needed to end. The last time Ridgeline's name came up in my world, it wasn't through a pitch. It was through a warning. A partner mentioned them in passing. "They're still good," he said, "but they feel unanchored." I understood. Because when the person who carries context leaves, everything starts floating. Meetings still happen. Emails still get sent. Contracts still exist. But no one knows which thread to pull when something goes wrong. And eventually, something always does. I never posted about what happened, never shared a think piece, never wrote a thread. I didn't need to. Every agreement I draft now carries my fingerprint. Every partnership built under my guidance holds. My reputation speaks quietly, but it speaks first. Here's the lesson they never taught in leadership training. Visibility is not power. Control over access is. Knowing when to speak and when to disappear is. Building something people rely on without realizing it is. Because when they remove you without understanding what you hold, they don't get a second chance. They get a reminder, and reminders are expensive. If this story resonates, it's not because it's rare, it's because it's familiar. People are dismissed every day, not because they lack value, but because their value isn't loud, because it doesn't fit into dashboards, because it doesn't perform well in presentations, because it works too well to be noticed, until it's gone. If you've ever been replaced and watched things unravel quietly after, this wasn't coincidence. It was design, not revenge, not karma, just structure asserting itself. And if you're still in the room, still holding things together without recognition, document your work. Build relationships beyond titles. And remember, some bridges don't need to be burned. They just need to be walked away from. Because once you stop trying to prove your worth to people who never learned how to measure it, you make space for those who already know. And that's not retreat. That's evolution.